First, just tell everyone that's going to hear this interview a little bit where you're from, what college you went to, and what got you into the broadcast industry.
Well, my hometown is Campbellsville, Kentucky, and I worked my way through college at Western Kentucky University as a sportscaster, disc jockey, newscaster for radio stations, both in Campbellsville and several stations in Bowling Green. And then when I was graduated from Western in '82 with a degree in broadcast journalism, I was invited to start my television career at Channel 34, which in those days was actually there in the Campbellsville area. It was actually in Adair County. It's since moved up here to Louisville. I went from there to Bowling Green, Kentucky, then from there to Charleston, South Carolina, then to Jacksonville, Florida, then to Nashville, Tennessee, and then came to Louisville in 1994 working for WHAS. And did that for 10 years, and then started my own broadcast company shortly after that. And our broadcast company I have now is called the Red and Blue Review TV Network, and we have, I think we're up to 13 affiliates now across the state.
Wow, so you've been all over the country and doing cool things like that. I saw recently where you were at the Final Four. How was that for you?
Well, that's the third straight Final Four I've gone to, and I've lost count how many I've done through the years. The neat thing about this one is my two sons got to go and work the games with us. I have a television production company that produced several games on the road at the Final Four in St. Louis, Indianapolis, then in Dallas. And my boys went into the locker room and got to do post-game interviews with the players from Kentucky and Louisville and the other teams they were playing while we're on the road. And it's always neat that I think it's the best sporting event in America, the Final Four in the NCAA tournament. It's well done. The games are evenly contested. There's a lot of passion in fan bases that show up for these games. That was the first time I was in AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas, and it is the most remarkable sports facility I've ever gone to. So between the opportunity to go and spend time with your family covering a sporting event and going to a place you've never been before, well, I've been to Dallas, just not to that stadium, it was real fun. I think Kentucky had played Florida in the championship game rather than University of Connecticut. I think Kentucky would have won its 9th national championship. I think this Kentucky team did everything that was asked of it. For those guys, mostly freshmen, to get to the Final Four and then to the championship game was a great accomplishment. So even though there won't be a national championship banner hoisted in Rupp Arena's Raptors with this group, a Final Four and a national runner-up is about the best you could hope for.
Oh, yeah, they had an incredible run, and I can only imagine how cool that was for you and your boys. So now, can you think of a situation where you maybe had to make an ethical situation, maybe in your job, where you had to make a decision between right and wrong instead of just what the rule book said?
I think there's an opportunity for you to do that really with almost every story you do. There is a tinge of subjectivity and objectivity in just about every story. So I don't think you can really isolate it to singular events as much as it's probably a decision you make on a really daily and consistent basis. As you're determining what story makes the air, you've already determined by which stories don't make the air that they're not important either to you or to your audience. So there's a good bit of ethical decision-making that go into that. The one event I can tell you about that stands out in my mind most clearly was in, I think it was 1994. I was covering the new, or the hiring process of a new football coach at the University of Louisville. During the 6 o'clock news, maybe the 11, I think it was the 11 o'clock news, all my competitors were announcing it was going to be a certain person hired as the football coach at the University of Louisville, and my sources were telling me that those guys were not correct. So my boss was putting a lot of pressure on me to report what everyone else was reporting when I did not know that to be true. And I knew if I messed this up, I was going to get fired. So there was a considerable amount of pressure on me to do what my boss wanted me to do, even though I knew if I reported that, I'd be reporting something that I didn't have the facts for. That doesn't mean it was going to be wrong. It just meant that I didn't have the facts for him. So I stood my ground and worked through the night, and literally worked through the night, me and my entire team, and managed to find out through calling all kinds of sources that we did and didn't have, through the night and managed to find out at about 7 o'clock the next morning that the new football coach was going to be a young man named Ron Cooper. And we went on the air and we broke that story, and I proved to be correct in sticking to my guns and making a decision that when I couldn't confirm it myself, I had to decide whether I was going to do what my boss wanted me to do or if I was going to do the right thing. And this is one of the rare occasions when it worked out that I stuck with my guns, and I turned out to be right. Now, as it turned out, after 10 years at the same company, I'm getting fired anyway. So, sometimes great victories are not celebrated for a long time, but at least I know that as we recall that's one instance in which we made the right decision. Now, just to give you a little more background on this, when this story first started to break, my boss told me that if I didn't break the story, he was going to fire me. Now, when you have somebody like that that has control over your life and your destiny, telling you that if you don't break the story, you're going to lose your job, compromising your ethics becomes the easiest thing to do. I remember wrestling with a decision about whether or not to bug an office building where I knew these people were going to be meeting who was going to decide who the next coach was going to be. We had the technology to do it, we had the ability to do it, and we had the opportunity to do it. And it was very tempting for me to throw away my personal ethics and journalistic efforts in order to save my job. If I had bugged that room, I would have known everything going on. No one would have known about it, most likely. But I would have known about it, and it would have been wrong. And it's just another instance where I don't want to come across sounding heroic, because I wasn't. It was very tempting to do it. I just decided not to do it. So the temptation, especially when there's a lot at stake, millions of people watching you, and hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line for advertising, there's a lot of pressure to compromise what you believe in for economic expediency. Mm-hmm. And it's a tough issue that journalists wrestle with, and not just journalists. People in any type of walk of life have to deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, definitely. So whenever you're making the day-to-day story decisions of what should be said and what should not, how do you in your head go through whether you should report that or whether you should just kind of report what needs to be reported and leave the other stuff out?
I try to always put the audience first, Courtney, because I've always believed that if you take care of the audience, they will take care of you. I think you need to give the audience a certain level of benefit of the doubt that they're smarter probably than people might think they are. So I always try to make a decision on what I think is best for the audience. If I think it's something that they need to hear and they want to hear, I'll share it with them, even if sometimes it's something uncomfortable. If I feel like it's the right thing to do, I'll do that. I think now, since there's so many different competing voices out there speaking to you from a media standpoint, whether it's television, radio, internet, you name it, I think it makes that decision more difficult and more clouded because there's so many people chirping for your attention. You tend to make a bad decision to make sure you're the one getting heard. I'll give you a great example of that. On the night of the national championship game down in Dallas, a story broke down there that former Kentucky basketball icon Rex Chapman tweeted out that John Calipari was going to be the next coach of the Los Angeles Lakers, and he went on to say in this tweet that it's a done deal. Now, this is just a few hours before Kentucky is going to play for the national championship. That tweet was all about Rex Chapman trying to get his name out there, trying to get his tweet out there, trying to get his follower numbers up, trying to get his retweet numbers up. It was a really poor decision from that standpoint, and he was dead wrong. But that's what happens in the media now. The landscape's changed so much that people try to do sensational things in order to break themselves away from the crowd. And that's a challenge that new media communicators have to deal with. It used to be when I was just in daily television, I was competing against journalists. And although it may sound unbelievable, journalists do have ethics. We do have a code of ethics and some sense of training and propriety. Anybody with a Twitter account can reach anybody in the world now. And so a lot of times those decisions of the more traditional media actually get skewed because now they're competing with people who, some of whom have the information, and very few of them have filters. So now not only are you competing against journalists who do have some sense of right and wrong and some ethical background, and that's not universal, but now you're competing against a world of bloggers and information providers who have no constraints on what they report and no consequences if they get it wrong.
Yeah, definitely. And so, as a final question, if you could give any advice to future journalists and broadcasters, I know your daughter Grace is going into this business. What would you tell them when it comes to making the right ethical decision? Like, what should they stand for? Just what kind of advice would you give?
Well, I guess I would give from the standpoint of someone who approaches their job from a Christian worldview, I would encourage them to listen to that still small voice that we as Christ followers would believe is the Holy Spirit. I can tell you that through my career, anytime I've heard that voice speak to me that I should or should not do something, without exception, when I have violated that gentle nudging, I've always lived to regret it. And so I think my advice to be someone who is a Christ follower is to make that your final arbiter, your final editor. If it doesn't feel right, don't do it. If it clashes against what your spirit tells you to do, don't do it. From a more broad-based and worldly opinion, I think I would go back to what I told you a moment ago, is to always consider the audience first. What is in their best interest? Perhaps not exactly what they want to hear, but what is in their best interest for them to hear. That's totally a judgment call. You have to know who your audience is in order to make that decision. But that would be my final advice to someone as they're making that moral and ethical choice about what gets on the air and what doesn't.
Okay, well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to do this interview with me. I hope you have a great day, and it's been great talking to you.
My pleasure. Thanks very much, Courtney.
Thank you. Bye.